He says something he doesn't agree with, so he walks away
Yeah, I
every
know.
time.
It is. He's such a drama queen. All right, so tonight we are going to once again do what we do best, which is find a bottle
Drink bourbon.
that is, yeah, drink bourbon.
There's
But
something we do best.
yeah, we found a bottle that hits readily available and is $30 and replaces a $45 impossible to find bottle. And we're going to see if it's better than the other one because supposedly they're the exact same stuff. So I'm not going to say which one's which, but one of them is Kirkland's Bottled and Bond, which means there's only one bottle this can go against, which is 1792 Bottled and Bond, because Kirkland or Costco signed an agreement with 1792 that their brand is going to be 1792 Barton product that is going to be distributed under the Kirkland signature name brand. So they've got three lineups. They've got Kirkland small batch, which is 1792 small batch, Kirkland Bottled and Bond, which is 1792 Bottled and Bond, and then Kirkland single barrel, which is a combination of full proof and single barrel setup. So I have had the Kirkland's Bottled and Bond, and I've had the single barrel. Both are really good, and it made me want to do this flight to see if Brian and Chuck can determine which one is better, and do they pick the 1792, or do they pick the $25-$30 Kirkland? And it's $30 for a liter, not a 750. So
Yeah, and availability's got to be different, right? So it's like I remember last year I picked up a 1792 Bottled and Bond in August, and then saw it a few times after that. This year, I don't think I've seen it in my stores when I've been shopping. So
yeah,
really hit or miss. So the Kirkland Bottled and Bond is definitely going to be more available.
yeah, I think 1792 Bottled and Bond is only released twice a year. So it's, I mean, I've seen it once this year. Hopefully there's going to be a fall winter release, but yeah, it's there for maybe in the Louisville area 2 weeks and then it's gone. So
Yeah, and I'll echo that same sentiment. I got my first 1792 Bottled and Bond last year and loved it. I think I even picked up a second during the second release and have not been able to find it this year at all. So
yeah,
anyone I talked to was like, yeah, we haven't even seen it.
So yeah, so even if the Kirkland doesn't win, but it's a close, it could be a great substitute. So we'll see if it's worth it. So the noses are very, very similar.
Number 2 is a little different to me. I get a little more. I want to say young, but a little bit more, maybe more, a little more grassy, grainy notes. I get a little bit of sweetness on number 1. So like I'm giving the edge on the nose to number 1.
I can
Slightly.
go with that.
I almost get a little bit of vanilla on the back end of number 1. It's kind of nice. I don't know if you guys are picking that up at all.
Yes. Yep. A little bit of more of the tradition. I mean, it's subtle. A little bit of that traditional bourbon note as far as caramel and vanilla on the backside. Oh, that's classic Barton on the palate of number 1.
Yep.
Get some of that rye floral spice. Finish is a little lacking. I mean, both of these are Bottled and Bond's 100 proof, right? But
Yep.
don't get a lot on the finish on number 1. Kind of goes away once the palate's nice, but
Yeah, and I'll definitely say the rye peppery finish or rye peppery notes of a high rye bourbon is the predominant flavor you're getting. There's a hint of vanilla and a little bit of caramel sweetness on the very front end of the palate, and then it just gets overpowered by everything else.
Yeah. Although I would say I do feel like the finish number 1, like the pepper lingers for a little bit very subtly, but like the majority of the finish is there and then gone, and then just a slight pepper linger.
yeah, it's pretty very few notes. I mean, you described some of that caramel and sweetness, TJ, but I mostly get that kind of typical high rye bourbon floral note, and then it kind of transitions into a little bit of pepper finish, but it fades pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say as a result, very easy to drink.
Oh yeah.
So anyone who's new to the bourbon game or introducing someone to it, this would be a great one to throw their way. I feel like on number 2, aside from a little bit more sweetness, it seems like everything else is like a slightly more muted.
I think that's a perfect example. Yeah, all the notes are there. I think the sweetness comes out a little bit more, and then because the pepper notes and rye notes are a little more muted, so it's, I would say, a little more well-rounded, but at the same time a little more watery maybe for the muted part. And then the finish, I think, lingers a little more. Like, it's, as far as like an ethanol note, like you just know that you got some alcohol lingering and buzzing compared to number 1.
2, that pepper, the finish does linger longer. I think everything else about number 1, I would give, the noses are really close. Maybe I give the nod to number 1, but the palate I prefer on number 1. But then I think that finish does linger a little bit longer. Now, whether it's like you said, it's some of that's just like that ethanol, what we kind of come through as a spice. But
yeah, and I think I agree with you on everything. I'm definitely going to give the nose just slightly to number 1, the finish to number 2 because it lingers a little bit longer. But I think I'm going to give the palate to number 2 just because the rye peppery notes aren't as predominant, which allows more of the palate to come through. So I get more of the flavors. Now, I will agree that they're more muted and mellow compared to number 1. It's not as much of an in-your-face thing. But at least, like, for where I am right now, I enjoy that, and I'm looking at it as more of an approachable, I want to get into bourbon type of thing. I think number 2 is more that. As you drink more bourbon, I think you'll go more towards number 1 in the long run.
I would probably give the nose to number 1. I think we're all in agreement there. I actually like the palate on number 2 better. A little bit of that sweetness in there. Even though it's more muted, again, I think it's easier to pick up on what is there. But the finish, I'm going back to number 1. So for me, number 2, the finish is just a little bit too muted on number 2. It tastes like a finish I would get from, if I had my bourbon on the rocks and like the ice is mostly melted into my bourbon. It's kind of the end of it. Like, that's the finish I get on number 2. Like, it tastes like a watered down finish.
That's actually, I like it. That's a really good explanation. I think you can say that for the whole thing of number 2. It's a little like you had an ice cube in number 1, and that's what we're drinking, I think.
And then number 2 is you poured it, you put an ice cube in it, walked away for an hour, and came back.
I think that's exactly kind of what it is. So I think we can agree they are both good. We wouldn't have a problem at price point buying either one. So I guess the real question is, which one do you prefer, 1 or 2?
I'll go first because I think I'm going to be the deviant, which is unusual for me. Normally it's Brian who's the person that just sits out on an island and nobody agrees with them.
You are deviant.
I know. I think Chuck's going to say this, and we're all going to wind up agreeing with him. So.
Oh, really? You think so?
Yeah, I'm pretty.
I mean, the way you guys describe. Well, so anyway, without further ado, I'm going to go number 1. So I give the nod on the nose to number 1, which I appreciate, and then to me the palate is better. I like those floral traditional Barton notes that come through pretty pronounced. The finish is the only knock. It does kind of go into, you could describe it as a watery finish, but to me it's just a non-peppery, spicy finish, which probably appeals to a lot of people. Not necessarily what I always look for in a bourbon, but I think between these two, like this one's more of an ethanol burn pepper finish that probably isn't as broadly pleasant to people. So I'm going to go number 1. I'm actually surprised at the differences between the two, to be honest. I mean, there were a lot of similarities, but yeah. So I'm going to go number 1 by a slim margin, the slimmest of margins.
So part of me here is wanting to contradict Charlie just for the sake of doing it, but in this case, I actually get to prove him wrong and
Prove me wrong?
be right. Is I'm going number one as well. He is not the deviant that he thinks he
okay.
is.
No, interesting.
So and honestly, number one's just good. Again, nose, I feel like number one. Palate, slightly number two. Finish, I'm going to give you number one. And again, splitting hairs, either one of these, whatever price point is which, I'm going to be very happy with. Slight nose by a hair, number one. Different night, I feel different. Tonight's number one.
Yeah, and for me, I'm also going to go number one. I think number two is just kind of a watered down version of number one. It's definitely got more of the flavors. I might argue maybe a little bit too much in your face flavors, which kind of makes me second guess, should number two be better? But I mean, at the end of the day, when you're drinking bourbon, everything like that, you want flavors. So I'm not going to knock it down because its flavors are more pronounced and everything like that. So I'm going to also go number one, but say that they're both very good and you're going to be happy with either one on your bar. No questions asked. So without further ado, number one is 1792 bottle.
Okay.
Which, again, it goes back to my feelings on George Remus. If you own the liquor, are you really going to give away your best stuff or something that can truly compete with your product? I mean, it sounds like a terrible business model to me. So,
supersede now.
Yeah.
To discerning palates such as ours.
Yeah, it is one of those. Like, I think if you just got into bourbon and you're looking for something and you got a Costco near you, buy it. Like Kirkland Bottle and Bond, you are not going to be disappointed with at all. But as you get more into bourbon and you look for those nuances and flavors, it's still hard to beat 1792 Bottle and Bond.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to as far as availability. So it's like, hey, if you can snag a 1792 Bottle and Bond, buy two, you're set for the year. If you can't, and you're like, I need something on the shelf, and you're at Costco and buying 37 oranges and 25 avocados and anything else you buy in bulk from Costco, your slab of salmon, pick up your bottle of Kirkland as well.
With that, we'll see you next time, and good luck hunting.
Stay neat.
Power of bourbon.